The day Justice sat in the judge's chair. The courtroom was a pressure cooker, the air thick with tension and the musty scent of old paper. I stood frozen as Margaret Hensley, the iron-fisted president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, let out a piercing scream. "I won't stand for this nonsense," she bellowed. Her face twisted in fury as she hurled a thick binder of documents straight at my son, Daniel. The papers weren't just tossed, they were launched with venom, the heavy metal clip catching Daniel's cheek. Then, in a horrifying blur, she shoved him. His wheelchair skidded out from under him, and his head struck the polished courtroom floor with a sickening crack. Gasps erupted from the gallery as blood began to pool at his temple. In that moment, my heart stopped. The gavel hadn't even hit the bench, but our fight for justice was now stained with my son's blood. Margaret thought she'd won, her smug grin practically screaming victory. But she'd overlooked one critical detail. Those papers she'd thrown weren't trash, they were her undoing. And less than 10 minutes later, in a twist no one could have predicted, it was Daniel, bruised, bloodied, but unbowed, who was invited to take the judge's seat to preside over the rest of the hearing. The law doesn't kneel to bullies, it rises for the vulnerable. This wasn't just a legal battle. It was a war over a strip of lakeside land our family had owned for generations, a simple right-of-way that predated the cookie-cutter lawns and gleaming mailboxes of Willow Creek. Margaret Hensley, with her perfectly pressed blazer and clipboard of bylaws, saw our easement as a blemish on her pristine community. For 18 grueling months, she'd waged a campaign of harassment, wielding fines and threats like a dictator. Today was supposed to be her final strike. Daniel sat beside me, his calm exterior hiding the storm within. A lawyer since 2006 and a volunteer in the state's Emergency Judicial Reserve Program, he was no stranger to high-stakes battles. But this was personal. Our lawyer, Tom Bradley, presented a meticulously compiled binder of evidence, deeds, letters, emails proving Margaret's vendetta. When he offered it to her with professional courtesy, her knuckles whitened on her chair. "Mrs. Hensley," Judge Evelyn Harper warned, her voice sharp, "you will accept the submission for review." That was the spark that ignited the explosion. Margaret's scream of "nonsense" echoed as she flung the binder. The clip grazed Daniel's face, but the real blow came when she shoved him, toppling his wheelchair. The crack of his head on the floor silenced the room. Time froze. I dropped to my knees beside him, my hands trembling, afraid to touch him. His eyes fluttered open, pain etching his face. "Dad, she actually did it," he whispered, a flicker of disbelief in his voice. "Stay with me, son," I said, my voice hard as steel. "Remember the plan. Remember the papers." Our strategy, built over months of torment, snapped back into focus. As an EMT from the jury box rushed to help, checking Daniel's pupils, I spotted a single sheet among the scattered documents. It was from Margaret's stack, stuck to ours by static. The subject line hit me like a thunderbolt: expedite easement nullification via punitive fines. It was her confession, thrown in her own fit of rage. The courtroom erupted. Judge Harper's gavel fell, her voice cracking as she shouted for order. Bailiff John Ramsey restrained Margaret, who stood panting, triumphant, oblivious to the felony she'd just committed. The EMT confirmed Daniel wasn't concussed, just cut and bruised, and helped him back into his chair. A court reporter's phone captured every second, turning Margaret's assault into undeniable evidence. As I gathered the scattered papers, Daniel raised his hand, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Your Honor, I request the record reflect a violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act has occurred in open court, perpetrated by the plaintiff against the defendant." It was a masterstroke, framing her assault as a federal offense. Judge Harper nodded grimly, and the clerk, Sarah Miller, logged it. Then came another blow to Margaret. Her phone, left on with AirDrop enabled, had sent a screenshot of that damning email to the clerk's iPad. The evidence was mounting, and Margaret's empire was cracking. But the real shock came when Judge Harper stood, her face pale. "In light of the assault and new evidence, I must recuse myself," she declared. Her husband's firm had ties to Willow Creek's developers, creating a conflict. To avoid delay, I invoked judicial emergency protocol, appointing a reserve judge. Margaret smirked, thinking a recusal meant delay. More time to bleed us dry. But Judge Harper's next words shattered her. Is any member of the bar present on the emergency judicial reserve roster? Silence fell. Then Daniel raised his hand. The room gasped. Margaret's laugh died as her lawyer paled, realizing the tide had turned. Daniel, the man she'd just assaulted, was now the judge. After a tense 15-minute recess, Judge Harper confirmed Daniel's credentials. The court appoints Mr. Daniel Lawson as judge pro tempore, she declared, handing him the gavel. I draped the oversized judicial robe over his shoulders, my hands brushing his still damp hair. The contrast between his fall and this moment of authority was dizzying. As he ascended the ramp to the bench, the room watched in stunned silence, the soft hum of his wheelchair the only sound. All rise, Daniel commanded, his voice steady. The room obeyed. You may be seated. Power had shifted. Margaret's sneer vanished, replaced by horror. She was no longer the untouchable HOA president. She was a defendant facing a judge she tried to break. Daniel wasted no time. Let the record show the easement was recorded in 1951, predating the HOA's 1983 incorporation by 32 years, he stated, displaying our deed on the courtroom monitor. Margaret's claim of authority was gutted. He moved to her evidence, grainy photos of trespassers meant to justify her actions. Forensic analysis confirms these were taken 7 miles away, irrelevant to this case, he said, exposing her deception. Then, her police reports, hash value analysis shows their forgeries. Margaret shot to her feet, screaming, "This is a farce. He can't judge his own case." Her lawyer tried to hush her, but she was unraveling. Daniel's response was ice cold. When I sat at that table, I was the defendant. Now, I am the court. Be seated, or you'll be held in contempt. She sank, defeated. Daniel turned to Lisa Carter, the HOA's PR chair. Ms. Carter, are you aware of payments to Dalton Investigations from the HOA's funds? Her panic was palpable as she stammered a weak lie about security consultations. Then her phone buzzed, displaying a text from their insurer. Policy canceled due to intentional acts of violence by a board member. The HOA's liability shield was gone, exposing board members to personal ruin. The dam broke. Property manager Carl Thompson stood, producing a USB drive. I have records of fraudulent fines and intimidation ordered by Mrs. Hensley, he said, requesting whistleblower protection. Neighbors followed, exposing her conspiracy with Crestwood developers. A Zoom clip, accidentally projected from Lisa's phone, showed Margaret saying, "Just give that wheelchair a good kick. They'll sell." The courtroom froze. Bailiff Ramsey unsnapped his handcuffs. "Mrs. Hensley," Daniel asked, his voice ablade. "Care to provide context for that kick?" She had none. Her own words condemned her. Daniel declared the case a criminal matter, issuing protective orders, freezing HOA assets, and referring it to federal authorities for civil rights violations. He ordered Margaret's arrest for felony assault. As Ramsey cuffed her, she screamed, "I'm the president." But her reign was over. The fallout was swift. Margaret and her ally Tom Barron faced federal charges for conspiracy against rights. The HOA was fined $75,000 for Fair Housing Act violations, and Margaret paid $10,000 personally for contempt. Our settlement covered Daniel's care and our losses. The community elected a new board, passing the Lawson bylaw for accessibility and transparency. We used the settlement to launch the Lawson Advocacy Project, creating a free handbook, "The Rules Are Yours," to empower others against petty tyrants. It's been downloaded thousands of times, helping people from Phoenix to Charlotte fight back. A year later, by Willow Creek's lake, Daniel and I watched the sunset. The easement path was clear, and he stood with a cane, a symbol of his resilience. The real victory wasn't the money or Margaret's prison sentence. It was the silent corridor of honor as we left the courthouse, strangers parting in respect. Daniel wasn't a victim. He was a champion. Justice wasn't just served, it was reclaimed. What do you think? Have you faced injustice or violence in your community? Share your story and stance in the comments. Is justice still alive where you live? Let's keep this conversation going.